Hello and welcome there, guys, to my new series, Playing the Game. What game, you might ask? Dungeons and Dragons. That's the game. Yes, Dungeons and Dragons. Now, this game has been around for a long time, and by long I mean since the 70s, and it's pretty dang fun. I enjoy playing D&D a large amount and play pretty much every weekend. Now, unfortunately, there are many of you out there who have not ever played D&D before and do not know your way around a 20-sided die to save your life. So that is why I am here. Because, at some point you may be invited to play with people. And it'd really be bad if you couldn't play just based off the fact that you have no idea what's going on. And you're trying to play with people who have every idea what's going on. This really was the fact for one of my friends who joined us in a game at one point, and although she got through it, it probably would have been a whole lot easier with a little instructions on how things worked. So that is why I'm here with you today, and I've got, just give me 1 second, my trusty Halo bag that I use for D&D with me today. And in it, pencil, character sheets, as well as other papers, my dice bag, which has my dice, and then my books. And we'll talk about those all individually, as well as, let me grab one, I keep a few around the house. Some notebooks. You're going to need one of these pretty well, and a lot of the time if you're going to really become a great D&D player. Unless you have a photographic memory, in which case throw out the whole notebook idea thing. But most of us don't, so, notebooks are helpful. So, pencil, because you're going to be writing stuff. I mean, it's the simple fact you're going to be writing and erasing a good amount of stuff because things happen in the game. And things that happen are represented in points and scores, and you need to keep up with those points and scores so that once you run out of a certain number of points, your health or your hit points, then certain other things happen. Now, for sake of argument and just talking about things, I'm just going to pull out one set of dice. This comes from a company called ChessX. They make some great dice. I visit them every year at PAX, and their dice are sold online at PAXs and Gen Cons and things like that, and at local hobby shops, so real easy to find them. So, alright, so here we have what is known as a D6. Now, why is it called a D6, you may be wondering? It's because it's only got 6 sides. Most of you know this as a regular die. Anything you'd play most games with. And then we have a D4, and I only introduced the D6 first because it's normal. D4, 4-sided dice, triangular. It is the smallest die you usually use. Other than that, it's a coin flip. Though there are some other odd dice, they aren't usually used in D&D. From the D6 up, you go to a D8, and then a D10, which you usually have 2 of these in a set, and I'll tell you why in a bit. Then you have a D12, and then you have your D20. Alright, so you may be wondering, why do you have all these dice? Well, different dice will give you different probabilities and have different scales. For example, if you're going to be fighting with a dagger, okay, a dagger is generally represented by a d4. Come on. Come on. Focus. Focus. Anyway, it's generally represented by a d4 because it can only do a maximum of 4 points of damage, but it can still only do a certain minimum as well. Similar with the d6, it can do a maximum of 6 points of damage. It can do also a minimum amount of damage, and it scales up. Really, the most amount you generally I see people use is multiples of d6s, because there are some weapons that do a d12, but after that it generally goes up by d6s. So that varies, and really you'll get to understand it after a certain point, when you get to that point, because that's when you get really powerful weapons and things in the game that make things a lot more interesting. So the reason you have 2d10 is these are what are known as your percentile dice, and they're exactly for that. They give you a percentile. They give you a random number between, well, 1 and 100. Or you could say, I guess, 0 and 99, but 2 zeros, 0 on both die, represent 100. Though, like I said, you could say it was 0 to 99, because that's the only numbers you actually see. And then you've got your d20, which actually is used quite a lot, even though you haven't normally seen these probably. Now the d20, we know, due to recent archaeological evidence, goes back to ancient Greek and Roman times for things like names and different other sorts of things. And yeah, so all of these have the reason we use the kind of dice we do is because they're symmetrical, pretty much. You know, you've got this where the top and the bottom are symmetrical, so it has a even amount of odds. That sounds odd, but the odds are always even as to what you get, which still sounds odd. I'm sorry, there's no easy way of saying that. I have my whole bag full of dice, and that's because you're really going to want more than one set of dice with you. When you start playing, you may only have one set of dice, but say for example you play a wizard uses a lot of d4s. You only get one d4 in a set, so you may have to borrow some other d4s or buy extra d4s on their own, or just buy a lot of sets. A lot of people enjoy collecting dice. I do myself, and this is another set I've still got a case for, and it's kind of clearish blue dice. They're what are called frosted dice. But beyond the dice, you of course have the rule books or the handbooks. Alright, now right here I have the player's handbook, and then this is a extra guide that goes with the player's handbook. You don't need to worry about this right now. You don't even really have to worry about the player's handbook right now if you're going to play 5th edition, because of the fact that 5th edition has the basic set of rules already set up and free to download on your computer. You can get it straight from Wizards of the Coast, and I'll leave something down in the doobly-doo for you. A lot of people are using that now, doobly-doo. It's actually a very fun word to me. Beyond that, you also have your character sheets. And I'm just trying to acquaint you guys with some of the different things you have here. So, here is a character sheet. It has a bunch of numbers that represent different things. Numbers that represent how strong you are, how dexterous, how intelligent, how many hits you can take, how wise you are, and how charismatic you are. And then from those stats we get a bonus score, and that's mainly due to the fact that it has to be every other, and it has to do with a lot of different math stuff that'd be hard to talk about in this video by itself. But essentially it's trying to get a 1/2 thing. So for example, to get, instead of just doing 1.5, 2, it's 16, 17. And they have the same bonus because you're not going to have a half a bonus, because everything gets rounded down for you. Everything gets rounded up for the monsters though, which kind of sucks. So let's talk, now that we've got some of the general items out of the way, let's talk about D&D itself. D&D is a game of magic and fantasy. D&D is a game that arose from legends and tales like Lord of the Rings and other such ancient things like the Knights of the Round Table and whatnot. In fact, a lot of the original ideas for everything and the original names for gods and demons and things and creatures in it came from ancient aspects. So you have things like the Hydra from the Greek myth. You have gods like Ares and Artemis from Greek. You have gods like Thor from the Norse and other things of that sort. Ra from the Egyptian. So D&D is kind of an amalgamation of different mythologies and fantasies and stories, and it sets you within this fantasy land, and you get to play as a great hero ready to fight these mythical monsters. Now of course you don't start out as the greatest of heroes normally. Usually you start out as a level 1 whatever, and so you may have just been a peasant your entire life and learned how to swing a sword, or learned how to steal from people, or you may have been working in the church your whole life and learned how to heal people, and then you get called off to do some random quest that leads you into an epic adventure. And we see this in movies and books all the time. One thing I want to remind you of is D&D isn't about being the character from the books and the movies and following that path. D&D isn't made to make your character as Wolverine or as Hitman or lots of other guys. It's a fantasy setting. There's rules to it, and although there are ways to kind of get something similar, it can be hard, and you really need to be able to work with your DM, which means your dungeon master. He's the guy who kind of rules over the game. He's the arbitrator, if you will. He kind of sets the story, makes sure things move along, and things of that sort. In fact, if you're going to be a DM, I recommend you actually go to a different thing, and for some reason now I can't think of his name because I'm a horrible person and I can't think of the correct name right now. There's a guy from Turtle Rock Studios, and he does some videos. Alright, it's Matthew Colville. He's a writer and designer at Turtle Rock Studios. He does some videos about how to dungeon master, how to be a dungeon master, how to be a good dungeon master. He personally does like 2 different groups right now. He's done multiple DMing groups, DM'd multiple groups in the past, and you know, go to him if you want that, but this is more about the players, as I've said in my intro video, which if you haven't seen the intro video, you can go watch that. It's not really important, but it could be fun. So although I did say we're kind of through with a few things, didn't get all of them. So because I don't have any of my miniatures with me today, which is a sad, sad fact. I've got this, which is an amiibo, but I'm just using it as a representation. So you're usually, if you're going to play in a certain way, will have a miniature, which is a miniature version of your guy, and it can be made out of plastic or pewter or different stuff. You can buy them all over the internet. And it just represents your character, and you use those to help do things like distance from a monster and, you know, distance from an area and things like that. So, you know, sometimes the DM will say, well, the room is 20 by 30, and I'll draw it out, and then you put your miniature on this little grid of 20 by 30, and you figure out where you are in the room, where other things are, how things relate to each other. It makes things less in your head and more kind of real, but some people prefer it in their head, and so sometimes it's played without miniatures. In fact, it first was played without miniatures, so you've got to consider that. But I did say I'd get to this. Now, why do you want one of these? A lot of it has to do with cataloging and knowing your information. Now, a good DM will give you some hints if you forget something, but not all DMs are that way. Sometimes you need to have your stuff written down or know it perfectly, unfortunately. And so, thus, you have something like a composition notebook or just a binded notebook of some sort, you know, something you have paper on that you can keep up with. And you take notes. So maybe your DM tells you, you know, there's this kind of little cave off here named Zarthon, and it's ruled by, there's some goblins, and a ruler in there is named Ishnu, or something like that. Well, you'd write that down, and then, you know, if someone asks you, well, what's that cave named? Or you say, well, I want to go to that cave you spoke of earlier, and he's like, well, what cave? Which one? You know which one it is. If, you know, he gives you a name of somebody, you need to know the name so that if you're talking about that character, you can say who the character is to keep track of things. Now, hopefully, if you're new, the DM is going to be very nice about making sure that things aren't hard on you. But eventually, you're probably going to need one of these. Like, you're just going to have one. Because, I mean, I've been playing since I was 5 years old. I'm 20 now, and I've got to have them. I mean, it's either that or I'm writing everything in the margins of my character sheet. And that doesn't really work after a certain point. You have to know what places are called, what people are named, how far things are away from places. And it sounds complex, but it's really not that hard once you get into it. And a good DM is going to start you out in a smaller area. You're not going to have to worry about hundreds of miles away or anything like that. But that's the general of it. Now, I want to talk about some other stuff in the next video. There's a lot of things we need to get into here. But really, I just wanted to introduce you to the dice, what they're called, what you need, and that sort of thing, so that you understand kind of the core of what you gotta what you have to get together before you start playing. Like I said, if you can get a couple sets of dice, or multiple of whatever you need for your character. Now what you need will be in the rules, so whether you download the core rules off the internet, or you get a rule book, whether it's 5th edition or any of the other editions that have come before it, it will talk about what you roll to hit, what you roll as damage, what you roll for hit points, and we'll start talking about some of those things later. What hit points really are, what damage means. I mean, obviously you kind of understand a little of this if you've played games before, but not everyone has. And I really want to make this where everyone can learn how to play D&D. So thank you guys so much for watching. And if you liked this, please tell me. Please tell me how I could improve. This is kind of a new thing for me. And by the way, I am not affiliated with Matt Colville at all. I just saw his stuff, and it inspired me, and so I decided I'd make something about how to play, where he's making stuff about how to DM. So, thank you so much. And as always, from me, Death's Crowbar, to all you nerds up there, to all you gamers, and to all you geeks, keep doing what you do. And if you're trying to learn D&D, definitely keep trying to do that. This is Death's Crowbar, signing out.